What's up guys, Sean16 here with another discussion on Here's What I'm Thinking, and today's discussion is on the Marvel cartoons, namely the Marvel Animated Universe, or the MAU for short, and how they went from being successful works of art to becoming utter trash or failures for a bunch of different reasons, all while under the influence of Disney, and if it could be fixed. Now firstly, I must say I don't hate the current status of the Marvel cartoons, I just don't like how Disney's been treating it. Now there are some positives to the current Marvel cartoons. I did like Disney XD's adaptations of Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers, and even Spider-Man 2017, kinda, as well as the miniseries of Marvel Rising Secret Warriors. I think those shows have somewhat good writing and a great voice cast for the shows. Well, mostly. I could tell they try to have their shows be like the MCU films, from the character designs and personality, and I always like that aspect about the shows, especially when it comes to Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers. Now that was my positive take on the current status of the Marvel Animated Universe. Now it's time to talk about the negatives. Now what I don't like about the current status of the Marvel cartoons is that the shows have the shittiest and laziest animation I've seen to date. We always have to wait a year for a new season of a show, which in retrospect some animated shows do that anyway, but we only got one Marvel cartoon show running right now, that is Spider-Man 2017. Where are the other shows? Anyway, I know I said the shows have somewhat good writing, but if you listen to some of the dialogue of these shows, they would make you cringe. Then there are the characters who make the shows just hard to watch at times, making them the least likable character for their shows. For example, Spider-Man from Spider-Man 2017 is kinda my least favorite character of the show, and that's funny as shit because he's the main character. He's annoying every time he tells a joke that relates to science, plus that's another problem with his character. As Peter Parker, he's a science guy. It's his entire personality to constantly remind us, the audience, that Peter Parker is just a nerd that loves science a lot. He's not really a relatable character like the previous adaptations of the character because not everyone is into science like him, which is the problem with almost every other character on this show. There are a bunch of science-loving people. Their daily lives are constantly compelled to talk about science. Now, I think the show shaped up and dialed it back on the science references a bit during the mid-season of Season 2, but Spider-Man is still my least favorite character. Like, I place him with Spider-Gwen and Spider-Girl. For why is for the same reasons I just stated about Spider-Man. Gwen and Anya aren't really interesting characters in this show. However, I do like characters like Miles Morales. Despite being treated like a sidekick, Harry Osborn and Doc Ock, they do bring something to the show that Spider-Man himself doesn't. They have somewhat compelling story arcs that keeps me invested into the show. Now, with the positives and negatives out of the way, I can now talk about how we got here. To answer the question of how Marvel cartoons went from success to failure, and the best way to answer that is to take you back in time, to a time where so many cartoons were at their highest peak of popularity. That time being the 1990s. In the case of Marvel cartoons of the 90s, they weren't the best cartoons out there, but they were quite memorable. You had Iron Man, X-Men, Fantastic Four, Hulk, and my personal favorite, just like everyone else, Spider-Man, the animated series. I think what made these shows memorable was their storytelling, having a huge cast of characters, good animation, action scenes with an amazing music score, but we all know it was the theme song intros. It was the MCU before the movies. The shows would be more enjoyable when it had guest appearances and cameos, especially when a character of their own show crosses over to someone else's show, like Spider-Man joining the X-Men, or Captain America and Iron Man joining Spider-Man's latest adventure. It was something spectacular to witness, as it was something that was never done before except in the comics. The success of the Marvel Animated Universe shows ran through the 90s and into the 2000s, where cartoons started to get edgy and dark. At this time, Marvel cartoons were the shit. You had shows like X-Men Evolution, Spider-Man the New Animated Series, Fantastic Four World's Greatest Heroes, Wolverine the X-Men, and personal favorites Spectacular Spider-Man and Iron Man Armored Adventures. Each show of the 2000s had all that made 90s Marvel shows so good, but the 2000s took it to a whole new level. They had great storytelling, unique animation, memorable characters, plenty of action, and a kick-ass theme song.
Spectacular, 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 spectacular.
They dove into a different style and attitude that made the show so captivating and memorable. Dark themes worked in the 2000s for the Marvel cartoons as it helped redefine the story and the characters, who would be more grounded, vulnerable, and emotionally driven. The superheroes were humanized and made out to feel like real people despite being cartoon characters, which made us, the audience, care about them emotionally. As good as the MAU was in the 2000s, there were cracks that started to take place. As popular as they were, each Marvel show kept facing cancellations one by one, which is truly sad for any fan of these shows, to be honest. I think both X-Men and Spider-Man got the worst of it within its era of the 2000s, having two of their shows each being, for Spider-Man, the New Animated Series, and Spectacular, and X-Men's Evolution and Wolverine being cancelled. Where many have considered each show were good, was sad to see them be plugged just like that after 2 attempts. Before I move on, I do want to make mention of the other Marvel cartoon I neglected to mention that closed out the 2000s. Marvel's Superhero Squad.
I hate those squaddies.
Yeah, that show was the beginning of the failure for the Marvel cartoons. Well, that and Disney. Okay, so now we move on to the 2010s of Marvel cartoons. And now that it's 2020, the beginning of a brand new era for Marvel cartoons, I could say Marvel cartoons of the 2010s it wasn't that great. It wasn't that good. I mean, they were off to a good start. With Iron Man Armored Adventures, continuing to the end of 2000s and into the 2010s, and soon enough came Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes on Disney XD. You know, I gotta say, at the time, it was weird to see Marvel shows on different kid-friendly TV programs. You had Avengers on Disney XD, Iron Man on Nickelodeon's sister channel, Nicktoons, and Marvel's Superhero Squad on Cartoon Network. These were weird times in the early 2010s, man, especially when Disney was buying Marvel during that time. With Iron Man and the Avengers shows being the strongest entries of the start of the 2010s Marvel cartoons, it soon came crashing down when the MCU film The Avengers happened in 2012, leading to Iron Man Armored Adventures to be supposedly cancelled in 2012, and Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes to be rebooted into 2013's Avengers Assemble. There was also, at the time, 3 months before the Avengers movie, Disney XD debuted Ultimate Spider-Man, which ended up setting up its own Marvel animated universe on that channel. Personally, I liked Avengers Assemble, at least the first 4 seasons. It had great animation, good storytelling, great set of characters, and some good action scenes. As for a show like Ultimate Spider-Man, on the other hand, meh. But the animation was good though. Marvel cartoon shows that followed were Hulk and Agents of Smash, Guardians of the Galaxy, and a Spider-Man reboot simply called Marvel's Spider-Man, but everyone just calls it Spider-Man 2017. The only good show to come out of this lineup was Guardians of the Galaxy, in my opinion. I didn't enjoy Hulk and Agents of Smash or Girl. It just never interested me in any way. The jokes were lame, and it felt like there was no story progression within the episodes. And I was kind of annoyed by the fact that all we got to see was the Hulk being the face and star of his own show. Sure, that kind of makes sense. I mean, his name is in the title, but you do realize what I mean by this, right? This is the exact same problem with the Avengers cartoon. Hulk is all we get to see. Where the hell is Bruce Banner? Why don't we get to see him enough or at all? There's just too much Hulk, not enough Banner. And then you have Spider-Man 2017. I already went over this in the beginning of the video. I said I kinda liked it, but if I had to choose between this or Ultimate Spider-Man 2012, I'd have to go with Ultimate Spider-Man for at least having good looking animation and some good ideas for the show, like the Web Warrior season and how it had characters with unique personalities. If I had to choose between Ultimate Spider-Man's fourth wall breaks or Spider-Man 2017's science-related jokes, I still choose Ultimate Spider-Man. But again, overall, the 2010s Marvel cartoons were a letdown compared to the 90s and 2000s, and it certainly took some steps back in quality. The shows of Avengers Assemble, the first 4 seasons, Ultimate Spider-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, Agents of Smash all had good-looking animation and memorable and unique characters, but suffered individually for lacking something. Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, and kinda Ultimate Spider-Man excel at storytelling and character development, where Agents of Smash and Spider-Man 2017 tries and fails. Now, I do want to be a bit nitpicky for a moment. As much as I sometimes like the writing and storytelling of a modern Marvel cartoons, I don't like how they never really get into romantic themes and plots. Like, they have low to no presentation in any of the shows. Like, they hint at it every once in a while, but won't build off it. Now, I'm not much of a sap for love storylines and media, since most of them make me cringe, but I do enjoy romantic storylines when it involves a lot of build-ups, as long as the payoff is good and deserving, and that it feels natural. I'm okay, I won't cringe. It's always been something I'd enjoyed since both the Raimi Spider-Man films with Peter and MJ, and, this is gonna be weird, but the Kingdom Hearts games with Sora and Kairi. But the modern Marvel cartoons doesn't make much of an attempt with Disney XD. I mean, again, they make hints, like in Ultimate Spider-Man, they tease the possibility of Peter and MJ being a thing in Season 4, but that's all that it was, a tease. There was a Star-Lord and Gamora, which amounted to nothing in the end. Same with Black Widow and Bruce Banner, which was probably because of how Age of Ultron was. I really do think that when Disney XD started their own Marvel animated universe, they painted a clear image of what they wanted, which was displayed in the first episode of Ultimate Spider-Man, where Peter recaps his relationship with MJ and how they tried to get together as kids by having their first kiss, but it was a mistake, which in some way is set the tone for the rest of the Marvel animated universe, that romance isn't needed, but ideally focus on the concept of friendship and family, which is Disney in a nutshell. Another nitpick is, how do we go from this to this? From this to this?
What the shit?
How do we have animation that looks so good become animation that looks as generic and unappealing? Did they have to make budget cuts or something? Just everything looks and feels downgraded from its previous animation, from detailed background settings / location to character designs. It's just awful. And to put one more nail in the coffin of nitpicks, what the hell did they do to the concept of canon? Canon, in Marvel's case, meaning it takes place in the same universe. They share the same universe. For Marvel cartoons, the only way we saw something canon was within crossover episodes. Crossovers make for some special episodes, but now they don't make sense in Disney's Marvel animated universe, as reboots like Spider-Man ruined the timeline in canon. Spider-Man had his fair share of teaming up with the Avengers, even before getting his own show, and was a guest star in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which makes that non-canon. But when it came to Ultimate Spider-Man and Earth's Mightiest Heroes reboot Avengers Assemble, both shows were canon, having characters of either show make numerous appearances while keeping the same animation style and design, and that every time they meet in every episode, they already know each other and have some history. It was only when Spider-Man 2017 came in and ruined all the canon storylines that tied down the Avengers and Guardians to the Ultimate Spider-Man show. Spidey being a clean slate and teaming up with characters from the Avengers and Guardians, ones with their own show, ruins those shows' canon timeline too, all for the sake of Spider-Man 2017's universe. So now, where do we go from here on out? As of right now, based off the Wikipedia, I can assume Spider-Man 2017 is the only Marvel cartoon show currently still airing on Disney XD, as the show has renewed for a third season. As for Avengers and Guardians, they wrapped up last year. There hasn't been much information I've been able to find to confirm any chance of either show to be renewed for another season. Based off Disney XD's current presentation and appeal of the Marvel Universe block, as well as XD as a channel, I don't really have a lot of high hopes for Marvel cartoons going into this decade of 2020, which has been such a bad year so far, because of Devil's Breath. But we got a whole decade to see if Marvel cartoons can improve its quality and value, and I'm going to give some advice, some tips of how to improve the presentation of Marvel cartoons. Have a better sense of direction when it comes to a story. A show with more story progression and build up in each episode. Fix and improve the animation quality. Characters need more vulnerability and sympathy, even some of the villains, to grab the audience's attention and to see their points of view. The best example of it are the MCU films, not to mention, if I had to pick one of the XD Marvel shows, it has to be the last season of Avengers Assemble, Black Panther's Quest. The season of Avengers Black Panther's Quest did a decent job executing on making the characters vulnerable and sympathetic, like how Black Panther was framed for Captain America's death and was turned on by the Avengers. I thought that was some good storytelling that finally got a little edgy. Plus, to add more to the edginess, a few side characters died in that season from what I remember. Because of Black Panther's Quest season, future Marvel Animated Universe shows should follow what it did. Get in more dark and edgier moments and themes into the shows. Now, someone will say these shows are for kids. Yes, that's true. The current product of the Marvel Animated Universe are for kids, especially that is under Disney's hands. But let's not forget, Disney has a history of getting into dark themes and edgier moments. It's mostly presented in their films than their shows, but they're capable of showing it to kids. Finally, one last tip of advice. Stop rebooting the Marvel cartoons. It ruins the timeline and story canon. So that's pretty much all I need to say about the Marvel Animated Universe. Do you agree with what I said on its prior success that then became somewhat of a failure in today's generation of cartoons? And could it be fixed at this point? If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button, comment, subscribe, look me up on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and as always, I will see you next time.